Hi everybody, TheHande here, and welcome to another Finland stuff video. And today I wanted to talk about a topic which I mentioned when I was reacting to the video, Geography Now's video on Finland. And the topic today is basically, what does the term Scandinavian actually mean? Because I mentioned in the video that Scandinavian can mean a lot of different things for a lot of different people. And if you ever say to a Finnish person, a person from Finland, such as myself, that we're Scandinavian, you are basically going to probably get one of two reactions. One is probably an indifferent reaction. Person might not even react in any way whatsoever because Finns are notoriously shy. The other reaction is going to be some variety of, well, actually. In a worst case scenario, the Finnish person might actually get a little bit angry. Because whether Finland is or isn't Scandinavian is a very complicated topic because people mean different things when they use the word Scandinavian. And at least in two possible definitions, you are probably using it incorrectly. So today I'm going to be talking about the three main ways that you can use the word Scandinavian and whether or not Finland actually is Scandinavian. These are the geographical term, the linguistic term, and then a more broader cultural term. So let's begin with the geographical term because that's where it comes from. So first of all, what the heck is Scandinavia anyway? What does that word mean? Where does it come from? Well, Scandinavian actually comes from the Scandies. The Scandies is the mountain line which divides Sweden and Norway. Because of this, it is also referred to as the Scandinavian mountain line, and in fact, the Scandinavian mountain line is then in turn located within the Scandinavian archipelago, where Sweden and the vast majority of Norway is located. So as you can already tell, if you're looking at the geographical definition, you're looking at a very limited number of countries. It seems like the term Scandinavian applies to things around the Scandies, so the only things that seem to count is only Sweden and Norway. But people from Denmark would themselves at least consider themselves nominally Scandinavian. Now Finland, of course, joins in a tri-point border with Norway and Sweden, and a little bit of the Scandinavian mountain line does cross over the state border into Finland. But whether or not you want to count that as being geographically Scandinavian is a very questionable debate. But the problem here is that, of course, if you're going to talk about Scandinavian countries, then you also have to include Iceland, which is all the way in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. But even Denmark is a bit of a problem case because there is clearly water between it, Sweden, and Norway. By the way, I didn't say this at the very beginning, but of course the joint name for all of these countries is the Nordic countries. And the term Nordic just means northern, as in the north of Europe. In this definition, these countries seem to all match up more or less. Denmark is a little bit southward, technically part of mainland Europe. Still, it's close enough, I think. So this is probably the most slim definition of the word Scandinavian, and in this case, Finland really doesn't jive well. So what about the linguistic definition of Scandinavian? What are Scandinavian languages? Well, here Finland also comfortably doesn't belong into Scandinavia either. While Swedish, Norwegian, Danish, and Icelandic are all Scandinavian languages, Finnish is not. This actually is a much bigger deal than you might initially think. The Scandinavian languages are actually a very closely knit. If you at least look at the written form of most sentences, you will begin to notice that they are actually very similar. Now, as for the spoken forms, that's a little bit of a different issue. Swedish and Norwegian seem very close at least, although Norwegian uses a whole bunch of different little words and different spelling for things, although that's also a bit questionable because Norwegian technically uses Danish spelling because they used to be subjugated by the Danes. Danish, of course, doesn't really sound like anything. Just go off how people speak it rather than how they spell it.
Hoster alene og føler mig virkelig syg.
And Icelandic seems the weirdest one out of the bunch until you realize that because the Icelanders were so isolated for such a very long time, their language is actually the closest to Old Norse, which is kind of the forefather of pretty much all of the other Scandinavian languages. However, it's also important to understand that the Scandinavian languages belong into an even bigger language group, which is the Indo-European language family, which includes literally everything from English and French and German and Spanish and Italian, all the way to Hindi in India, which is where we get the whole Indo-European thing. Finnish is not only not part of the Scandinavian language family, it's not even part of the Indo-European language family. Finland belongs into this very lonely, very isolated group of languages called the Finno-Ugric languages. And the key point is that Finnish is such a unique language because it doesn't abide to a lot of the rules of Indo-European languages. In fact, the only major world languages, and I use the word major very loosely, that even resemble Finnish, include Estonian, which on the surface at least seems very similar until you get a little bit more into the nitty-gritty and realize that a lot of the words just mean completely different things, and Hungarian, such a far offshoot of the language that it doesn't really comfortably resemble either of the languages, although structurally there are a lot of similarities. So if you're talking about linguistics, yes, of course, Finnish is not a Scandinavian language, but wait a minute, Finland's bilingual, isn't it? Finnish-Swedish is kind of its own special little language, but even those within the Swedish-speaking Finnish community really do view themselves separate from, the Swedish. So what about that cultural side? Here I think we come to the point where, yes, you could definitely argue that Finland shares a lot of the core values with the Scandinavian countries, but again, I think it would be more helpful to talk about Nordic values or Nordic culture as a whole. If we get into the nitty-gritties of national epics and folklore, there is a definite difference between Finland and literally all the other guys. There is also a lot of division within the Scandinavian countries. We start to look at things like the countries themselves as political entities. Sweden, Norway, and Denmark are all democratic monarchies with a parliament that rules the country and a symbolic figurehead in the form of a monarch. Iceland and Finland are democratic republics with a parliament that runs everything and a symbolic figurehead in the form of a president. Iceland, Norway, and Denmark belong into NATO, while Sweden and Finland do not, though those countries do some amount of military cooperation with NATO. Iceland, Denmark, Finland, and Sweden all belong into the European Union, but Norway does not. And also, while Sweden belongs into the European Union, it does not belong into the European Money Union, the EMU, which means that they still use their own currency and not the euro. I should also point out that even though Norway doesn't belong into the EU or the EMU, it does belong into the Schengen area, which is why it is possible, if you are a citizen of any of the Nordic countries, to travel freely between those countries without needing to use a passport or any official documentation. Sweden also has the highest population. It's basically the most sought after and most well-liked of the Nordic countries. Norway has the highest tax rates, but it's also part of their master plan in order to ensure future financing for social services, because while they have a lot of money right now due to oil reserves, they know that that gravy boat is going to run its course at some point. Iceland doesn't have a military, and Finland actually admits the least amount of immigrants into the country, which is not something I'm particularly proud of, but that's at least one of the differences. However, you can see that generally most of these countries, however, value the social liberties of their citizens. They all have nationalized health care to better take care of their citizens. Most of the countries have conscription, except Iceland, of course. These countries pretty much abide by the rules. People should not be ruled by authoritarian oversight, although all of them do establish some amounts of governmental control. The rights for sexual minorities are relatively high on the docket. Religious freedom is more or less guaranteed in all of these countries. And at least from what I've heard from pretty much all of these countries, if you can manage to integrate yourself well into the society, most people don't seem to want to leave. People also need to understand that some of these values are not uniquely Scandinavian or Nordic, or necessarily even European. The reason they're very similar, of course, is that all of these countries have been in such close collaboration and interaction with each other for hundreds of years. Sweden, Norway, and Denmark, specifically even more so, because all of them have been at one point or another major world players, Denmark and Sweden particularly. Finland and Iceland as geopolitical entities have only existed for a very short amount of time, and Iceland has always been very isolated, which is why they haven't been able to really do a whole lot, even though most people really seem to like them. Finland was part of Sweden for nearly 500 years, then part of Russia for about 100 years, before any kind of Finnish national entity could actually even form. And it's important to understand that the reason we Finns even wanted our own country was because under the Russian rule, Finns really started to really just view themselves as their own identity and not just as former Swedes or current Russians. What I'm basically getting at here is that when people use the term Scandinavian, they probably are using it to mean something that most Finns would not understand it to mean the same thing. It is a bit of a complicated issue, and I'm not saying that this is the whole truth. I'm probably overlooking some little detail. I thought I should clear it up a little bit because I did bring it up in that one video. That's all from me for this time. I'm TheHande. See you on the next one.